Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is reprimand, and this verb was suggested by the viewer Luis. Luis, thank you so much for this suggestion. Now, let's take a moment and review some of the definitions or ways that we can use this verb. The first way you might encounter the verb reprimand can mean to rebuke or scold someone. Now, rebuke and scold are not widely used. So to explain that a little more, we're talking about someone verbally or perhaps in writing expressing their disapproval for someone's words or their actions. For many people, they might think of a relationship of like parent to children or teacher to children, and kind of one of those like, you know better, you shouldn't do this or that. Related to this first definition is the second one, which is to censure formally, usually from a position of authority or in an official capacity. So with this second definition, again, we're still talking about someone expressing disapproval, but here it's in a bit more of a formal way. So how we're likely to encounter this is in connection to legal proceedings. So a judge may reprimand either an attorney, it could be a defendant or plaintiff for, again, outbursts. So it could be their words, their behavior, could be for something else. And you might also encounter this word in context of an employer-employee relationship as well. And again, that employer, they have the position of authority, and so they might be expressing disapproval for certain behavior from an employee. For now, you should know that reprimand is a regular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing, and that forms reprimanding. The past tense and the participle form of our verb can be made by just adding ed. Our base verb, reprimand, ends in a voiced D sound. This means our ed ending is going to make an id sound. So we'll be adding an extra syllable to the verb when we say it. The past tense and the participle form of the verb should sound like this: reprimanded, reprimanded. Okay. Now, I do have one phrasal verb for us to discuss, and that phrasal verb is to reprimand for. Again, the meaning here is not really different. So someone might use it to talk about scolding, upbraiding, criticizing someone for an action, an error, or some kind of wrongdoing. So again, this is all about expressing that disapproval for that behavior. An example of this in a sentence might be, the officer was reprimanded for tasing a man without probable cause. I'm going to apologize for the typo there. I think maybe a little autocorrect there. So here, what the sentence is suggesting, and this was something I borrowed from a newspaper article, is that someone behaved improperly. So they're not supposed to tase unless they have this strong belief that someone is a danger or threat in this case. And so they're not using those electrical shocks. That's what is meant by tasing there. So this scolding or upbraiding or criticizing may have come from a supervising officer of some kind. It could have come from someone else sort of higher up the chain of command, but so maybe something that stays in his file, and if there's this repeated behavior, these repeated wrongdoings, then there might be more serious consequences or punishments. Now, let's continue using our verb of the day, reprimand, and we'll be using it in a couple different tenses. Today, we'll review the simple past tense and the simple future using will. Let's start with the simple past tense. We use this verb tense to talk about completed actions that occurred at a known point in the past. Now, sometimes our sentences will indicate that known point. It might use a word like yesterday, could use a phrase like 2 weeks ago. It may use a specific date, but not every sentence in the simple past tense will have that time signal. So it can be implied as part of a conversation or as part of a longer passage. The nice thing about making sentences in the simple past tense is that our structure is going to stay the same no matter what our subject is. So in the affirmative or with positive sentences, we'll start with our subject and then we're going to use the ed form of the verb. You can see that in my example. The judge reprimanded the defendant for her emotional outburst after the verdict was read. So here, kind of like a scolding of like, stop talking, right? Don't interrupt. And perhaps, again, if you do this more, there might be more severe consequences or punishment for that behavior. Now, let's move on and talk about making sentences in the negative. To do this, again, we start with our subject. We're going to use did not and then the base form of our verb. So notice, we're not using the ed form of the verb here. Let's look at another example. Parents claim the teachers who witnessed the harassment didn't reprimand or punish the students. So here, we're talking about a group of people who are very disappointed that there was no criticism, no scolding for wrong behavior. Now, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple past tense. To do this, we start with did, then we'll have our subject, and then the base verb. Again, I love pointing out to my students, they can notice this pattern, no ed form of the verb here in my yes or no question. The only time I'm using the ed form of the verb is in the affirmative or in positive sentences. Let's look at this last example. Did the teacher reprimand the students for misbehaving for the substitute? Now, let's move on and talk about sentences in the simple future. Today, we're going to be using will. Will is most commonly used as people discuss promises, as they make offers, or maybe as they make predictions for things they think have a likelihood of happening in the future. You will see people use it to discuss their plans, but they might do that when they're a little less confident about the likelihood of something happening. The nice thing, again, about making sentences here in this verb tense is that our structure is going to stay the same no matter what our subject is. So in the affirmative or in positive sentences, we'll start with our subject, we'll use will, and then our base verb. So no special endings to the verb here. Here's an example of a simple future sentence in the positive. We will reprimand employees for repeated tardiness. So again, maybe this is a company, an HR manager, maybe talking to new employees and explaining. This is kind of a threatening sounding promise, but it does seem that way, right? So they almost like a guarantee, if you will. So if you are repeatedly late, right, you're going to get a talking to. And again, sometimes that's an initial or first thing, and if it happens again and again, there could be more severe consequences or punishment. Now, if you want to make a sentence in the negative with the simple future, again, start with your subject, use will not, then the base verb. Sometimes people will use the contraction form of will not. That's won't. W-O-N apostrophe T. Here it is in an example sentence. The flight attendants probably won't reprimand you for ignoring the seatbelt sign. So here, maybe someone is talking to someone else, someone who's maybe having a little bit of an emergency, needs to get up. Maybe they're making a little bit of a prediction as to what they think, in this case, won't happen in the future. Now, let's move on and make a yes or no question in the simple future. To do this, we start with will, then we'll have our subject, and then the base verb. Here's my last example. Will the company reprimand drivers for calling out heat-related issues? Now, this is a fear many employees have in a variety of different industries, that if they speak out about something, are they going to be treated differently? Maybe in a negative way. Maybe something else will be added to their employment file. It could affect their ability to get promotions or raises in the future. But that's what that question is asking. Now, let's spend a moment and look at a word related to our verb reprimand. What we're going to discuss first is the noun form of this word. The noun reprimand has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation as our verb. When we use this word as a noun, we're talking about sort of that action of criticizing or expressing our disapproval. Some other words you might see to explain that is a rebuke or an admonishment, especially in that official capacity or in a more formal way. So an example of this in a sentence might be, a written reprimand is a form of lower level discipline that does not result in economic loss to the employee. I went looking for examples of this, and I found this in an old HR manual. Again, I was pretty confident this is a word we see in employment relationship contexts. So this is how a particular company discussed what this is or the significance of it within their organization. I want to say a special thanks to Luis again for suggesting today's verb. I thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.